Well, the head of the BC Wildfire Service is responding to that WorkSafeBC report. It follows an investigation into the death of 19-year-old Devyn Gale, who died when she was struck by a burning cedar tree that fell on her while she was fighting a fire outside of Revelstoke. WorkSafeBC says dangerous tree assessments were not conducted, even though other members of the crew raised concerns. And the report outlines a culture of normalizing risk and that safety protocols are modified in the field, which don't comply with regulations. David Greer is the executive director with the BC Wildfire Service. He says he accepts the findings of the report, but that the nature of the work is challenging and is difficult to control.
We accept all the things that were in the report that came out. It's very detailed. It's very black and white, and of course, there's a lot of nuances when you're out there in the bush fighting fire. We don't, as an organization, don't pin blame on certain individuals at certain times of things. And there's safety protocols in place and there's policies in place, and it's how they're looked at and how they're applied. That is a big thing, and it's something that we're very keenly working on, and that's really quite a mission of mine is how you show up as a leader, how you show up for your people, and to demonstrate safety and to listen to people that may not be as experienced as you, that may not be as comfortable out there. They see things that you don't see if you've been out there for a long time, and you start to normalize your environment.
That was David Greer, the executive director with the BC Wildfire Service. He was speaking with CBC's Daybreak South today. The CBC obtained this report through a Freedom of Information request. So let us know, what is your reaction to the WorkSafeBC report? What supports should be in place to keep firefighters safe? Call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Would especially love to hear from you if you do have experience as a wildfire fighter. Now, for more on this story, we're joined by CBC Daybreak South host, Chris Walker. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us. Chris, what are some of the key findings of this report?
Well, Amy, this report found failures up and down the BC Wildfire Service, from on the ground that day all the way up the chain to leadership and into the very culture of the organization, as you heard. So first, we have to keep in mind that this is a dangerous job, and it happens in very challenging environments and by very brave people, right? And so things can and do go wrong, but this is still, at the end of the day, a workplace. And the more dangerous the workplace, the more closely the rules need to be followed. And on that day, fighting that fire, the basic safety protocols were not followed. Nobody did an initial assessment. Two different firefighters at the site raised concerns about the very cedar tree that eventually killed Devyn Gale. One of them suggested that a no-work zone be established around that tree. No further safety assessment was done. The firefighters' concerns were not exactly ignored, but kind of dismissed or downplayed. Supervisors basically just said, keep your heads up. And a number of firefighters on that crew did not have the required safety training, the required experience. All of this contravenes policies and procedures and mandatory regulations. Now, nobody saw this accident happen. They heard the tree crack. Devyn was pinned under it and died, and two other firefighters were hurt trying to rescue her.
And as you mentioned, it is the more dangerous the job, the greater the risk. But it does seem that if there is such a extremely high level of danger, that every box would be checked, before you advanced into that. And I know that this report focus is the death of Devyn Gale, but maybe what did the report find in respect to, broader, more systematic issues within BC Wildfire Service? Because Devyn's death wasn't the only wildfire-related death last year for people in BC.
Well, this report outlines that firefighters had long-standing safety concerns, specifically about dangerous trees, that were brought to management, both in the fire service and at the ministry, concerns that were brushed aside. The report found a culture of minimizing safety concerns, on safety protocols. It says, quote, the normalization of risk has been justified within the culture and safety procedures are not being followed. It goes on to say there's a well-known and documented history of systemic compliance challenges and that it's a threat to worker health and safety, and that both the Wildfire Service and the ministry were aware of these challenges and aware that these risk assessments were not being done consistently. Now, this morning, I did talk, as you said earlier, to the chief of the BC Wildfire Service, Devyn Gale, the executive director. Here's what he said about the culture.
As a senior member, you notice your intuition. You have a different intuition. You notice the big thing. So you notice that the sky looks kind of funny, and you go, "We got to get out of here." And maybe a rookie will go, "I don't understand." And you say, "No, I know that the wind's blowing the wrong way. The sky doesn't look right." The newer person recognizes the smaller things that, as a veteran, that you may have forgot about because you've just normalized that. And so there's that whole exchange of information relationship that needs to happen, and that's leadership and that's culture, and that's what we're really driving here.
So the thing is, though, Amy, that doesn't really tell us a lot about why this culture exists at the BC Wildfire Service and how specifically it might be changed.
Right.
And, I should note that the previous executive director, Rob Schweitzer, who was in charge when this happened, was recently promoted to assistant deputy minister, and the head of firefighter safety, based in Revelstoke, is still in his job despite these many failures under his watch. So it doesn't really appear that anyone in leadership has been held accountable for these failures. And in fact, that lack of accountability within the fire service, that their internal reviews often justify these risks and normalize these risks, that itself is highlighted as a contributing factor to the culture here.
Yeah, and when I read the report earlier, that was surprising to me as sort of a not a blanket excuse, but an explanation that this is just the nature of the job, and this is the culture that's always existed. Devyn Gale was just 19 when she was killed, and in the report it does specify that it was unclear whether or not her and other young firefighters had received that proper young and new worker health and safety orientation. Did you get any sense from speaking with David Greer that more in-depth training will be mandated and provided for newer crew members instead of relying on that passage of knowledge?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, but I should be clear that Devyn Gale herself was actually quite experienced. This was her third season, despite being only 19. This was her third season.
You're right.
In the
Fair
bush fighting fires.
Thank you.
There were two other firefighters on that crew who were less experienced. And so, yes, we understand that these changes for young firefighters, that's already happening. And in fact, it was underway before the current fire season even began. The dangerous tree training is now mandatory. There's a new course for new recruits about dangerous trees. And in fact, they pulled crews off some of the lines early this year to ensure that time was available for all of these training requirements to be completed. But again, if there's a culture of minimizing risk and normalizing risk, all the regulations in the world won't change that culture. So there is a thought, though, that because there's now full-time wildfire service year-round, that culture may change with the professionalization and the full-time nature of the wildfire service.
Okay.
So WorkSafeBC doesn't make recommendations.
Okay.
They point out what went wrong and why, and whether or not internal regulations in the Occupational Health and Safety Act was followed. In this case, there were 6 violations of that act. That can result in fines. I haven't yet been able to find if there were any fines levied in this case. Those may or may not be forthcoming. And then, of course, there could be private legal action filed up to 2 years after this incident. But in terms of recommendations, it is up to the employer, the BC Wildfire Service, to draw lessons and implement those changes.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Chris. Really appreciate you taking time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
CBC Daybreak South host, Chris Walker.